Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to talk about adapting board games to Twine. And specifically, I would like to start a new project adapting the game Mini Rogue. Mini Rogue is a mostly solo, mostly single player card game with a sort of dungeon crawl theme. And so it's going to be, given the nature of the theme, it's going to be sort of quite suitable for turning into something that's more like a computer role-playing game. There was a free sort of print and play version of it made in 2016, and then there was a commercial version of it made a few years later. I'm going to start by adapting the free version, only because the free version is simpler, not because there's any legal difference in adapting a free game to adapting a commercial game. And in this video, I'd like to talk about the legal issues around adapting a game, assuming, of course, that you haven't got permission to do it and you're not adapting a game that you yourself made. So, as I am doing, I'm just adapting a game that I've found on the internet and sort of quite like the look of. Bear in mind, none of this is legal advice. You shouldn't rely on the word of a stranger on the internet who isn't a lawyer. And even if I were a lawyer, I probably wouldn't be a lawyer in your particular jurisdiction. And even if I were a lawyer in your particular jurisdiction, I wouldn't know the details of your, of your particular case. And those little details can alter things. So I'm just going to talk about sort of the issues that I have faced and my thoughts on them, and what I intend to do. I'm not presenting that as something that that anyone else should rely on, of course. So there are different elements to a game. It's not as simple as saying you can adapt a game or you can't. There are different aspects to a game. There's the art. There's the name of the game. There's there might be sort of trademarks. Which is trademarks is different to copyright, and then there are the sort of general mechanisms for playing the game, and then there might be particular terms that are used in the game, and some of those terms might be specific to the game, and some of them might be sort of general terms that are used in other games, and so some of those things can be free for you to use, and others of them not. The artwork in this game I really like. That was probably the thing that sort of attracted me to it first. To me, To me, it sort of looks like artwork from maybe an old animation, like some sort of cartoon from the 1950s or 60s or something like that. Unfortunately, the art is definitely not usable. The copyright on art is fairly straightforward. You basically can't use it unless it's passed into the public domain. And a game, this seems to be original art that was created for the game, and that would definitely be the property of whoever created it, or whoever whatever entity they sold it to. So unfortunately, I can't use, I'm not going to use the art. I mean, practically speaking, you might say, well, I'm a very small channel and I'm not going to be selling this adaptation. That doesn't have any legal standing. There's no way that it's not that you're allowed to do things for non-commercial reasons that you can't do for commercial reasons. But it might have a practical difference in the sense that sometimes people might go after someone who's actually trying to sell, trying to make money off stuff, but they won't go after um, they won't go after more amateur productions. But so practically speaking, I could probably get away with it, but I'm not going to. I feel like A, it wouldn't be worth the hassle, and B, this is quite a small creator, and um, I don't want to make problems for them essentially. So unfortunately, because as I say, I quite like the art, I'm going to have to find my own artwork. But the mechanisms for playing a game are a different thing. It's fairly well established that you can't you can't copyright the mechanisms of a game. You can copyright their particular expression, and the when something is expression and when its mechanisms can be a little bit can be debatable, and of course that sort of thing is why we have lawyers. But broadly speaking, I could make a game if I wanted to. I could make a game that had the same rules as Monopoly, but making it look like the Monopoly board that we're all familiar with. That's probably illegal, but then it depends on how similar it is. If I'm trying to sort of give the impression that this is a Monopoly product, an official Parker Brothers product, and that will definitely be illegal. But there's nothing to stop me making a game. I mean, I wouldn't do this because I don't think the rules of Monopoly are very good, but there's nothing to stop anyone making a game in which you have money and properties and you roll dice and you go around a board and you can buy the properties and so on. So I can definitely make a program which uses the rules to, in this case, the print and play version of Mini Rogue. The name of the game and then terms used in the game, it basically depends on how generic they are. So, for example, in this particular card is a monster, and then there's another card called a boss monster. Well, they probably can't forbid anyone having a card that says monster or boss monster because those are existing and sort of general terms, and there's not really another way to describe an enemy in a fantasy setting. What's the word for that class of entity? Well, it's monster. It's not that that's an innovation of the game. But then if you look down here, you can see they have names for different types of monsters. So undead soldier, skeleton, undead knight, serpent knight. Well, none of those things are, really new or original. But then there's Og's Sanctum Guard. In the story, Og is sort of the main villain of the dungeon, the big bad of the dungeon. It might be that Og's Sanctum Guard is specific enough that can be copyrighted. So I would imagine that I could certainly call a monster a serpent knight, but it's a bit more questionable whether I could call them Og's Sanctum Guard. As it happens, I'm not particularly interested in those names anyway, and the same is true here. Undead Giant, Skeleton Lord, Undead Lord. I mean, those are all Serpent Demon. Those are all, I would imagine, quite generic sort of names. Whereas Og's Remains, maybe that's protectable, but it doesn't matter anyway. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in those names. I'd probably just give them completely different names and have the same stats. So, but this stuff like giving them a damage of 2 and that you get 2 experience points for defeating a serpent knight. That sort of thing is not something that can be protected. So that sort of stuff I can use, but the names, I could probably use those names and maybe not that, but I'm going to change them anyway. But then there's the name of the name of the game itself is Mini Rogue. Well, Mini is a pre-existing term and Rogue is a pre-existing term. Both are reference to a sort of common class in fantasy games, a sort of thief-like character. But in this particular case, they're actually referring to roguelikes. They're referring to a genre of video game, of computer game. So those aren't new terms. So does that mean I can call my game Mini Rogue? Well, probably not, because I again, not a lawyer, but I suspect that that would be seen as giving the impression that I have a connection or to the official game that I don't have. In other words, if a reasonable consumer saw my computer game and thought, oh, this must be the official authorized computer game version of Mini Rogue, then that is a problem. You know, I've done something that I can get in trouble for. So I won't be using the name of the game, even though the individual components of the name, Mini and Rogue, are fairly generic and already well used. I think giving the impression that I had a connection to the game can be legally problematic. But again, I don't consider Mini Rogue to be a really great name anyway, so I don't miss that. The thing that I do miss is the art. I really would like to use the art because I think the art's very cool. But unfortunately, that's quite straightforward. You can't use other people's art without getting permission. So that is my understanding of the legal terms, the legal issues. If anyone out there has a law degree and you've noticed anything that I've said that is egregiously wrong, please say so in the comments and I'll correct it. I don't want to mislead anyone, but again, I don't want people to follow this as if it were advice. I'm just telling you my thought processes. But I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.